Hello, everyone. As noted in previous lectures, the spread of religion was one of the two great themes of the post-classical period. Now, this was the period in which much of the contemporary religious map of Africa, Europe, and Asia was forged, and the spread of religion would have common results in areas as diverse as gender relations, law, and even art. Now, we will try to remain value neutral as we look at religion, but we may encounter some pitfalls, particularly in justifying the selection of Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam as world religions. Now, in the post-classical period and after, each of these religions has shown the capacity to persuade people beyond conventional political boundaries and cultural zones that it represents the truth. Now, identifying these three faiths as world religion does not mean that they are the best religions. Many other religions were and are important in world history. When we say that these three world religions took geographical shape and exerted much of their influence in the post-classical period, we're not denigrating other major faiths. Now, from a historical standpoint, three factors caused the spread of world religions. The first of these is context. Although Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam began at different chronological points, their takeoff periods related to the collapse of empires in the later classical period. And as economic levels deteriorated, political instability grew, and the population saw new levels of disease and death. People looked for institutions to compensate for the decline of the state institutions. And this situation offered a compelling framework within which missionary religions could take hold. Now, the second factor involves the quality of missionary activity, which in all three cases was often correlated with expanding merchant activity. Now, merchants, through their commercial success as well as their geographical outreach, helped bring religion to new areas. And missionaries, as they sought to convert new souls, frequently established a framework for new commercial activity. The third factor involves the extent to which one or more of the world religions could seem associated with other aspects of success. In all three religions, individual rulers adopted the faith not just for themselves, but for their subjects. And in the process, they used the religion to cement loyalty between the people and the state. Religion might also be associated with commercial success. Converting to a particular faith offered the opportunity to trade with new sources and wealth. So again, those three reasons for widespread dissemination of these religion: the context in which they were done, the missionary activity, which moved along with merchant activity, and the idea that converting to a religion was maybe associated with certain aspects of success. Now, the chief change with these new religions was a replacement of polytheism. People stopped believing in the old sets of gods and goddesses and started believing in one of the more unifying, more abstract religious sources. This process of conversion involved compromise, and all the world religions, formally or informally, made some bargains with polytheism. They might, for example, build new religious institutions where old temples had been, or incorporate hints of the old gods and goddesses in the rituals of veneration for other holy figures. Now, these adjustments come under the name syncretism, that is, the extent to which in accepting new beliefs people hold on to remnants of the old. So Buddhism, as it fanned out from India, took two major directions, with the third at least briefly noteworthy. Buddhism began to lose ground to Hinduism in India proper, and many Indian rulers saw in Hinduism clearer support for military and commercial activity, and they distrusted the abstract quality of Buddhism. Now, as Buddhism faded in India, however, it gained ground elsewhere. It spread to Southeast Asia, and at the end of the early post-classical period to China, and through China to Korea, and then Japan. The Chinese embraced Buddhism with the stipulation that Buddhism adapt to Chinese modes of thought. Buddhism would also exercise an impact on other Chinese belief systems, such as Taoism. The Tang dynasty, in the first part of the post-classical period, ultimately turned against Buddhism on the grounds that Buddhists were unreliable allies of the state and too foreign to Chinese values. Now, the spread of Buddhism to other parts of East Asia was less qualified and would exert a longer-term influence than the spread into China. There was a Buddhist surge into Central Asia and belatedly into Tibet. Now, Buddhism showed an impressive capacity to adapt to local conditions and to tolerate and merge with other aspects of the local religious scene. Now, the story of the spread of Christianity may be somewhat more familiar. Christianity fanned out widely in the Roman Empire after the death of Christ, largely based on missionary activity. This spread involved not only the European parts of the empire, but also Armenia, North Africa, parts of the Middle East, Persia, and other parts of Asia. The Emperor Constantine's decision early in the 4th century to tolerate Christianity repressed a significant opportunity for Christian advance. And by the end of the century, Christianity was a state religion. Now, Christian expansion after the fall of Rome took two main paths. In Eastern Europe and the northern Middle East, the Byzantine Empire sponsored Orthodox missionaries who went northward into East, Central, and Eastern Europe. Western missionary activity fanned out to Britain, Germany, Scandinavia, and Poland. Now, during the post-classical period, Islam reached larger territories and more peoples than either of the other two missionary religions. Islam spread rather quickly among Arabs and some others in the Middle East and North Africa, and it also spread widely in India and Central Asia. Toward the end of the post-classical period, Islam began to make major inroads in Southeast Asia, particularly in Indonesia, which is now the largest Muslim nation in the world, and Islam also had success in parts of southern Europe and sub-Saharan Africa. So what were the differences in these three world religions? Now, unlike Christianity and Islam, Buddhism was not clearly a religion of the book. It had a less well-defined relationship to these authorities and was more hostile to things of this world. At the same time, Christianity and Islam differed on the nature of the divinity, how salvation could be obtained, how religion should be organized, and degrees of tolerance. Thus, the spread of world religions introduced a new differentiating factor into world history in Afro-Eurasia, a differentiating factor whose ramifications continue to apply to the present day. Now, these religions also had some common effects that could help describe larger processes of change during this post-classical period and beyond. The spread of world religions increasingly set the framework for artistic and philosophical activity. These religions defined the leading artistic and architectural work in much of Asia, Africa, and even Europe. And much work was devoted to questions about how older philosophical systems and scientific discoveries fit into the new sense of religious truth. Particularly for Islam and Christianity, the religions also reshaped the framework for law, dividing it between secular and religious activities. The notion that law was a state matter was jettisoned as the religions developed bodies of legal work and commanded jurisprudence. Now, all three religions raised new questions for the state itself. If these religions carried primary truth, what was the role of the state? Should the state be reshaped mainly to defend religion? Was there some way to separate political and religious areas of activity? And what was the relationship between religious and political authority? The rise of world religions might seem to introduce a new tension between value systems and even trade. If the main purpose of existence was otherworldly, too much attachment to material objects and motivations would be wrong. Nonetheless, the world religions also in their own ways encouraged trade. Now, each of the world religions also carried an important social message, although again a complicated one. On the one hand, the religions all posited the fundamental spiritual equality of all believers. On the other hand, they argued that social inequality and poverty would always be facts in this world. The main point of religious life was not to fight the social system, because that would distract from other worldly goals. The world religions modified the casual acceptance of inequality that described the classical period, but none of the religions crusaded against social inequality. The same bifurcation applies to gender. Each of the three world religions clearly specified that women had souls alongside men, and each provided new opportunities for women in religious vocations. Nonetheless, the world religions also sustained and even in some cases increased the institutions of patriarchy. During the same period, new institutions arose that coexisted with the religions and extended women's inequality. For example, foot binding in China and sati in India. The world religions also faced a choice between hostility and tolerance toward other religions. There are certainly examples of new levels of intolerance. For example, Chinese authorities attacked Buddhism, while Christians and Muslims clashed during the Crusades and the Christian reconquest of Spain. There are also surprising islands of mutual toleration in the post-classical period. For example, many parts of the Middle East saw significant Christian and Jewish communities remain even as Islam spread. And Muslim Spain tolerated and even encouraged interactions among the three basic religious faiths. Now, the choice of tolerance or intolerance was not fully addressed in the post-classical period, though new questions were eventually raised.